It's just a,
Tuesday, November 19th, 2013. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman.
Here.
Burt.
Here.
Shepherd.
here.
Schmidt.
Here.
4 present.
Thank you. And at this time, we have an opportunity for the public to speak on items that are not on the agenda. Sorry, I have a cold and I'm not speaking so well. And I have no speaker cards. So we'll proceed to item number 1, which is the Marcius, Genie, and O'Connell's audit of the City of Palo Alto's financial statements as of June 30th, 2013, and the accompanying management letter. And we have the City Auditor here. Welcome. Acting City Auditor.
Thank you. Human Busin, Acting City Auditor. In accordance with the City Charter and Municipal Code requirements, the Office of the City Auditor coordinates the City's annual financial audit. Macias, Genie, and O'Connell, or MGO, conducted the audit for the 3rd year, and 8 reports are presented this evening, including the City's CAFR. MGO issued an unmodified opinion for all the City's basic financial statements, which means that they concluded that the statements are presented fairly in all material respects. The auditors did not have any current year recommendations. However, in the report to the City Council, you will find the status of prior year recommendations. Of 5 outstanding significant deficiencies, MGO reports 2 have been corrected and 3 are in progress. Some of the recommendations cover areas that are also addressed in audits conducted by the Office of the City Auditor. We also met with MGO to discuss our concerns regarding internal control deficiencies and financial misstatements in the city's inventory balances. MGO did share our concerns regarding controls over the management of inventory, but overall concluded that the city's financial statements are not materially misstated. I would like to point out that the audits conducted by MGO focus on financial reporting and material misstatements, whereas audits conducted by my office address risks involving operational, compliance, and strategic objectives that may not necessarily have a material impact on the city's financial statements. I would like to thank David Bullock and Irene Chen from MGO, in addition to Lalo Perez, David Ramberg, and Laura Kurik, and her staff in ASD for their diligence and hard work in completing the audit. On that note, I would like to introduce David Bullock from MGO, who is here to present the audit results and the report to City Council. Thank you.
Good evening. Okay, well, I'm certainly glad to be here before Thanksgiving. It's nice, change of pace. The audit went as planned. We planned, I think, at the beginning of the audit to try and get it done on an earlier timeline, and I think through the effort and coordination of both the city and our side, we were able to achieve that. So very happy in that regard. You have before you 8 reports that we've issued and 1 management letter. And as Human mentioned, we issued unmodified opinions, a little bit different language now, unmodified opinions, and we used to talk about unqualified opinions. There's been new audit standards that we've been required to implement this year, and it's known as the clarity standards, and it's supposed to bring clarity and transparency to the information that we provide as the auditors. And so the audit opinions themselves, the opinion letters, look a lot different than they may have in the past. They've now got column headings or section headings that kind of lets you know what it is we're talking about for each paragraph. Before, it was just all the paragraphs are thrown out there with any kind of guide, if you will. And so it's helpful in that regard because it lets you know what we're talking about, whether we're talking about scope or we're talking about responsibilities or we're talking about the opinion or other sections of the report that we're opining on. So in that regard, it is helpful for the reader to understand. One of the significant changes this year we're on the non-GAAP based financial statements, and the city has two statements that you issue that are not in accordance with GAAP. One of them is the cable TV franchise audit, and the other one is the regional water quality control plan. Both of those reports are done for purposes of meeting contractual requirements, letting the other member agencies, letting them know what their responsibilities were, either on the water quality control plan or for the franchise fees, what their net receipts were. So those are on a contractual basis, not a GAAP basis. They're not full GAAP disclosure financial statements. So we have to express an adverse opinion, or basically state that they're not in accordance with GAAP. But then we turn around and say they are presented in accordance with the basis of accounting that they're being presented on. So that's a good thing. It's just a different way of presenting the information. So that was a significant change. And then also in the city's CAFR, that information is reported on the GAAP basis. So specifically those reports are done differently. The other thing is we did have one finding that we reported this year, and it had to do with your single audit, your federal awards under the procurement process. And there was the planning department is required to ensure that the vendors that are hired are not suspended or debarred, that they're not on a list of those agencies or those organizations not eligible for federal contracts. And it didn't have the certification in the agreement, and so we looked into it and determined that they weren't on the suspended debarred list. So we didn't consider it to be a compliance finding, but instead consider it to be an internal control finding, something that should be done on the prevention side to prevent those kinds of things from happening. And then we followed up on prior year's findings, both on the IT side for the city's general audit, and then also on the single audit, we had 3 findings from past years that we followed up on. I will point out that one of them had to do with a finding that related to the CFA, the Schedule of Federal Awards, not being complete. There was a Department of Transportation grant that was missing, a $1 million award that was missing from the city's single audit for 2 years, 2011 and 12. And so we reissued those financial statements. So you haven't seen those single audit findings because those were reissued reports. They weren't the original reports that we issued. Since then, the city has looked, and they can respond to any questions you might have on it, but they've made the corrections necessary to ensure that they're reporting the grants properly. So we listed that as a corrected finding. And what I call the management letter or report to the city council is kind of encapsulates any management letter comments, but also our required communications. In there we talk about estimates, we talk about changes in accounting where you've implemented new standards, we talk about any uncorrected misstatements, and any difficulties we encountered on the audit. So first of all, in terms of new accounting pronouncements, the city implemented 4 new standards this year, none of which were very significant. It changed some of the language in the report, but didn't really change the balances or anything that would be a major change to the financial statements. There's 2 other statements out there that are required to be implemented in the next 2 years that will make some changes. One of them will make small changes, and that has to do with reporting your information related to your debt. The other one has to do with pension, and that'll be a very significant change on how the city reports and accounts for its pension liabilities or pension obligations to its employees. And that's required to be implemented in 2015. CalPERS is working vigorously to get the information pulled together so that their participants, their cities, employers will have the information necessary to implement that. And the information, to my knowledge, is not out there yet, but they are working on drafting that information and working with their actuaries to get that information pulled together. The other section I wanted to talk about is the uncorrected misstatements. There were basically 2 areas or two things that were not corrected in the financial statements. One has to do with notes. Actually, it was corrected, but it should have been corrected last year. It should have been reported last year. And so the city made a correction there and ran it through the current year. And then the other one had to do with inventories, which Human mentioned. They're in the middle of one of their audits. And it looks like they may have definitely have some internal control issues that they're looking at, but it may have some financial statement impacts. we took a look at it and didn't believe that it was material to the financial statements that we're presenting on. So we got comfortable with what they were, and we don't think that the financial statements are materially misstated because of it. And as the city and the auditor's office work out the issues and the findings, we'll assess it next year to see what financial statement impacts it may have to the financial statements. And with that, I'd open up to any questions that you might have.
Colleagues, questions? Councilmember Schmidt.
Thanks a lot. It looks a very straightforward audit. So let me just ask a couple simple questions. I guess going back to the 2011 audit, you had a series of questions that we were still working on. And I guess you mentioned some of them on pages 15 and 16 about the primarily the security of IT, both against the security of the system itself and then fire thing.
Right.
Any comments on that, and does the city have any comments in response?
I'll just start off. We look at, we have our experts in the IT area coming out and helping us looking at these things and identifying areas where there can be improvement. And we've issued 6 findings back in 2011, one of which has already been corrected. 2 of them were corrected this year, one of which the city felt on a cost-benefit analysis that one of them should not be implemented and has other mitigating controls to alleviate those concerns. And the other 3 are in progress, and they have dates and kind of where they plan to implement those. And we rely on our IT consultant to assess that. And so I'll turn it over to Lalo maybe to talk about the city's perspective.
Let me ask Jonathan Reichenthal, our CIO, to come up and give you an explanation. Right there? Oh, either way.
Hi, Jonathan Reichenthal, Chief Information Officer for the city. I guess I'll talk specifically about the fire suppression system. I think that was mainly at the core, and then briefly comment on the others.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time on this topic. We also visited several data centers in the state. It's not unusual for this type of setup. Some of that did surprise me too. If you have all this electronic equipment and the water comes down, it's not in great shape. But there are a number of mitigating factors. I learned a lot through the process, as did my team. It is a dry pipe setup. What that means is there's no water in the actual pipes. The temperature has to reach a certain level before it would invoke it. And at that point, the room is pretty much on fire, big time. So the water is not going to matter. The servers are destroyed. The good news is if there is a little bit of smoke, and that will notify the the fire service, who will come up to that area, inspect the room, and attempt to extinguish the fire well before the water ever comes through the ceiling. So we felt there is a procedure, there is a recourse, it's not unusual. That said, I still remain uncomfortable that we have so much equipment in one place without sufficient recourse or equipment at a different location, and that's the very work we're working on right now. We are in progress to move some core systems out into the cloud, as we've discussed before, essentially another location, and that will give us, at the end of the day, the best disaster recovery in any eventuality. So we look at this as a multiple cause type response.
Yeah.
So,
and I guess that is connected to the second issue of security, that you feel secure moving our data into the cloud.
yes, we would not do something like that with insufficient diligence and assessment. There are many cloud providers now that are ensuring that they are delivering security specifically for government-related data.
Yeah. So the two critical issues raised by the auditor a couple of years ago, you think by mid-year 2014, we'll have both of them under control?
We will be in a vastly better position. It doesn't stop there. There are other things that a city can do to secure itself. There are other risks that we will uncover during the risk assessment piece that talks about that the audit reports talks to as well. And so the plugging all the gaps and protecting the city, I believe, will actually never be done because the cyber attacks continue and they get harder to solve and we fight. And so we will be beyond where we're at today in a much better position and we'll continue this fight.
Great.
I think it's indefinite, actually.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's see. On page 12 of the audit report, you mentioned particularly sensitive issues around estimates. And they include, I guess, fair value of investments. Those are primarily our investments, not
Correct. Yeah. So just real quick, the purpose of this is to identify those areas where numbers can be manipulated. And so, we're required to report those numbers that are estimates in the financial statements because they involve some sort of judgment, management's judgment on what those numbers should be. And so we're just highlighting the areas in the financial statements where there's judgment involved in recording those numbers.
But my understanding is our investment policy is fairly secure in the sense that we have dated securities.
That's correct.
Shorter term.
Yeah, so the California Government Code and charters and investment policies, all those things for governments, other than maybe pension plans that have a little different perspective on the kinds of investments and long-term planning that they're doing. But for cities, usually they're plain vanilla investments that they're not derivatives and they're not things where there's principals at risk.
So I guess the big issue we have with investments is our pension and health retiree
Yes.
accounts. Do you have anything to say about our relationship with CalPERS on that?
On the types of investments that they're
Yes.
the risk they're taking with those
That's
portfolios.
right. What responsibilities we have and how secure are their assumptions?
Did you want to comment on that? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I know Lalo's position. I just wondered if you as an auditor had any thoughts, ideas, notions that would be helpful.
Yeah, I don't really. I mean, CalPERS is widely regarded. I think there's concerns about how they invest funds and maybe how they report funds. They smooth things over 15 years, and they're starting to make changes over a shorter period of time, which will impact the contribution rates. But in terms of how they go about investing their funds, I don't really have a comment on that.
So you're not bringing an independent view of that. Okay, on page 22, there was a surprising number for me. Please, yeah.
This also brought something to mind. I know that we stopped doing Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac investments a while ago, I believe, but they're also rolling off of being government-backed as a security. Have you looked at that at all, as to whether or not we're exposed to anything by what our holdings are with that, or how that, or is that something we should need to do a deep dive on with our own staff?
We definitely look at the investments. We look at how the risk of loss of principal. We look at the quality. And we're not making judgments on the types of investments that are made. We're just ensuring that they're being reported properly, and the credit ratings and the timeline in terms of how the length of time and the distribution of time.
Right.
But we're not judging the quality of the investments that the city is entering into.
You're just taking the book value when you're taking the snapshot of the financials.
Right. And so,
Okay.
to my knowledge, there aren't any asset-backed securities.
Right.
in the portfolio. That to me, they're just, but some of them are federal
No,
agency
they're not,
issues.
but the ones that are government supported are, Fannie and Freddie have been in the news a lot lately. It's been expected that that's going to fall apart. They're trying to get rid of them. And I just didn't know if that was something that this would be a good time to maybe have staff come back with us on, with an explanation. I'm not expecting you to figure it out now. It's
Yeah.
just, how are we going to handle that? Do we have risk? That
Exactly.
kind of thing.
Right now, I just want to give you some comfort that you have adopted a policy that we put forward to you, and it has investment grades in there. If security falls out of that investment grade, then we would take action and come to you and tell you. Our understanding is that they would grandfather any security that is already issued under the old format, and the investment grade would change for the new format. So then most likely that security would fall out of the realm of our investment policy, and we would not be procuring those type of securities.
Right, but I just wanted to know for people that held those securities, what their expectation was. And so I think that would be something for follow-up, just, I don't think we need to. Yeah. But I did want to go ahead, and this alerted me to that, because it seems to be back and forth with what Washington's going to do with those.
So go ahead.
Page 22, on the GAN limit, you state a population increase for the city and then a cost of living increase. And I was shocked to see a 3.77 in there. I thought inflation was under 2%.
Yeah, this is the appropriations limit is adopted by City Council at the start of the year, and these provisions are brought to you for a vote. You're required to take an official vote. The CPI number that you're looking at is not inflation presented by the Department of Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's actually the California per capita income change. And so you're following the state's
Okay.
the state's inflationary factor that they use.
Per capita income on an inflated issue. Okay, still seems a little high, but thank you. Last question on page 41. Note 1 there, you're talking about general obligation bonds, and you mentioned the Mitchell Park encumbrances outstanding. Bond expenditures and encumbrances outstanding. Do you, as an auditor, look at percentage of completion when you're looking at something like encumbrances?
No, we're looking at the remaining amount on the contracts. So
Not the remaining amount that needs to be spent.
no, I mean, there could be, not all of the funds may be contracted yet. And so we're just looking, as we look at these numbers, we're looking at the contracts that have been entered into by the city, how much has been drawn or expended to date, and the remaining amount represents, what the city's obligated under the contract. And, there could be changes to that, change orders, there could be other modifications.
You're just looking at through June 30th. This is what the number.
Right, so this number should be, what's remaining to be spent on under contract
Okay,
as of June 30th.
yeah. All right.
Colleagues, other questions? I had just one. Can you summarize what the changes will be in 2015 on the pension obligation reporting?
Okay, so I don't have the CAFR in front of me, but in the CAFR, we report the schedule of funding progress. That's the, basically your position in the pension plan as of an actuarial date. And if you have the CAFR in front of you, it's on page 90, both the safety plan and the miscellaneous plan. And so what's going to be required is, first of all, the city reports the 2011 actuarial valuation, which is the most recent valuation available from CalPERS. And you can see that there's an accrued liability of 313 million for the safety plan and 552 million for the miscellaneous plan. Do you see those numbers? Okay. So that's what the actuary estimates your obligation to be at June 30th, 2011. CalPERS can no longer wait 2 years to report this information. You're going to have to report the information within a year of your date. So this is a 2013 report, so you would have to have the 2012 information at a minimum. So CalPERS is working on getting the information and getting the process done more quickly so they can present that information more quickly.
Oh, so so now that's familiar to me, that's the change that Lalo had expressed before, I guess earlier this year or late last year, that it's going to go to away from the 2-year blending, or is that different from this?
That was a different issue, but this is something that we heard at the recent CalPERS educational forum, that they're getting a lot of pressure to catch up on the 2-year lag.
Oh, it's just plain a lag that
Yeah.
has existed. Okay, separate issue from the blending, I see. Okay.
Okay. And so if you add those two numbers together, you're looking at just under 900 million. Okay. And then if you look over to the next column, you'll see the assets, and that's an actuarial basis of assets with smoothing and other things on the investments. That'll no longer be the appropriate basis to measure. You're now going to be using what the actual net position is of your portion of the CalPERS plan as of the date of the valuation. So in other words, you're going to be comparing the actuarial liability to the actual fair value of the assets or the investments really held in your plan. Okay.
So that would be the current value at that time. So we'd really be comparing a future obligation to a present cash value.
Yes. Yeah,
Oh,
they're going to discount it back using the discount
Interesting.
rate. So they're going to discount the liability and then in the case of your 2015 financial statements, it'll be your 2014 estimated obligation and the investments held at CalPERS as of June 30, 2014. That'll be the measurement date, and that's what you'll report. The difference, to the extent that the liability exceeds the assets, and most likely it will, that difference will now be reported on your government-wide financial statements. So when you look at your financial statements and you're looking at all your capital assets and your liabilities, you'll see it on your financial statements as your net pension liability. So that'll be a hard number on your financial statements. It won't be in your fund statements for the governmental funds. So your fund balance won't be affected. You'll still be able to look at your fund balance and work with your budget, and you'll probably still contribute on some kind of actuarially calculated basis. But the government-wide will present it on a full accrual. Your enterprise funds will also present it on a full accrual. So its portion of the pension liability will be allocated to those funds. Okay, and so that's what the numbers are going to look like, and then you're going to have more disclosure, and you're going to basically, there may be some changes in terms of the amortization period and other things that would affect how the liability is calculated and how the contribution rates are determined. So there'll be a significant number of impacts to the financial statements.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Burt, just to follow up, we are going to be bringing to the Finance Committee in December the latest actual reports, because we have received them since the audit, and go over them with you to give you the latest updates.
Great, thank you. So all our action is to forward this to the council. And I guess we still should take a motion to do that. Yeah.
So moved.
Okay. Wish to speak to your motion? A second? All right. All in favor? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And our next item is the recommendation to adopt an ordinance authorizing the closing of the fiscal year 2013 budget, including reappropriation requests, closing completed capital projects, and authorizing transfers to reserves. And then approval of the fiscal year 2013 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, or the CAFR.
Yes, thank you, Chair Burt and members of the Finance Committee. My name is David Ramberg, Assistant Director of Administrative Services. This is the fiscal year 2013 year-end report that we bring to you typically in the December timeframe, so we're a little bit early this year, and kudos to the team for crunching through this with MGO to get it out before Thanksgiving. We often on this night, you might recall from past years, have the first quarter financial report coupled with kind of this whole discussion. That item will still be coming in December. I believe that's scheduled for the 3rd right now. So with this report, hopefully you have the presentation in front of you. And I will go to slide number 2, which is the overview. I'm going to give you a few overview points that talk about the fiscal year 2013 financial performance of the city, and then turn it over to our accounting manager to...
Is this the presentation?
Yes, it is.
Okay, it says 3, but we're on 2. Okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it's item number 2. Thank you. And then we'll dive into some of the details, and then we'll follow up with any questions you guys have. Overall, starting on slide 2 here, the city finished fiscal year 2013 in a positive position. That's the overriding theme here. We continue to see revenues returning from the recession years. Strong growth in virtually all of our major tax revenues, and particularly sales tax and the transiency occupancy tax, otherwise our hotel tax. Coupled with good expense controls, we have a third-tier retirement plan now. We also have cost sharing across the medical and pension plans with our employees, and we also have systematic budget controls in place, all helping us keep our expenses in line with budget, if not a little bit less. And we had some vacancy savings that produced less than budgeted less than budgeted actuals on the expense side. And the other main point is that we had a clean audit, as David from MGO mentioned a moment ago. Slide number 3. You'll see in the details here that in several categories we had revenues exceed the adjusted budget. The adjusted budget is what the City Council approves in the mid-year timeframe. Usually that's about March of every year. So in March 2013, you approved the mid-year adjusted budget for fiscal year 13, which increased revenues at that point in time based on how we were seeing trends continue. Now we're bringing back with yet additional revenue growth above and beyond the adjusted budget. So that's important to note. Expenses, as I mentioned previously, we were less than budget, primarily in the area of non-salary budget savings and some vacancy savings. And all of this allowed us to contribute to the budget stabilization reserve in the general fund, and you'll see in a moment a nice transfer to the infrastructure reserve. The City Council has a policy for the general fund budget stabilization reserve, which pegs a target of 18.5% of adopted general fund expenditures as the target for how much we should have in the budget stabilization reserve, and it also offers the city manager discretion to recommend to the City Council that anything above the 18.5% level be transferred to the infrastructure reserve with approval of the City Council. So we are recommending that here tonight, and you'll see more details on that in just a moment. This is a nice third year now that we've been able to make a transfer to the infrastructure reserve, and last year it was a $7.6 million year-end transfer. This year it's $8.9 million, and those are healthy contributions to the infrastructure priority as set out by the Infrastructure Blue Ribbon Commission, and also by the City Council, of course. Clearly, there's still a liability on the infrastructure side that must be addressed, but these are opportunities for us to contribute in the years that we've recently had, and again this year. With that, I'd like to move to slide 4 and dive into a little bit more of the details, and I'll turn it over to Laura Couric, the city's accounting manager. Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Laura Couric. I'm the accounting manager. So first, I'd like to talk about revenue. And as David mentioned, the tax revenue sources outperformed expectations in fiscal year 13. Slide 4 shows 2012 and 2013 actuals compared to our 2014 budget. And you can see we had a double-digit year-over-year growth in sales tax, transient occupancy tax, and document transfer tax categories. And in total, fiscal year 13 revenue exceeded the adjusted budget by $3.5 million. If we look ahead to fiscal year 14, slide 4 again shows that the current budgeted amounts for fiscal year 14 sales tax and documentary transfer tax are currently sitting at 7% and 16% less than actual revenue levels for fiscal year 13. Property tax and transient occupancy tax are currently budgeted at 3% and 7% higher than fiscal year 13 actuals. So revenue forecasts for fiscal year 14 will be refreshed with the long-range financial forecast in December, and any mid-year changes will be presented to you in February. On to the next slide, number 5, on expenses. The fiscal year 13 actual expenses totaled $144.6 million, which was $3.4 million less than the adjusted budget. The savings were due to higher than expected vacancy savings, and non-salary savings were spread evenly across departments. As far as the historical trending of expenses, if you could turn to packet page 89, you'll see the 5-year trending history. And you note that police and fire combined reduced their expenses by 4% from fiscal year 12. That was due to reduced overtime and as a result of operational efficiencies, as well as increases in contributions to pension and medical. You'll note from page 89 also that planning and community increased their expenses by $1.9 million. That was due to increased volumes of development and building activities, and there was an increase in revenues as well to offset those expenses. So for these major departments that are listed here, the combined expenses stayed flat at $137 million year over year. So fiscal year 12 totaled $137 million, and fiscal year 13 totaled $137 million. Then the next slide, number 6, is on the budget stabilization reserve. We had an opening balance of $28.1 million as of July 1. Our surplus for fiscal year 13 we're showing as $8.9 million. And so how was that surplus created? We brought to you an adjusted budget which showed a surplus of $1.7 million. So that was our starting point. The additional revenue that I discussed amounted to $3.5 million. The reduced expenditures that I discussed in the previous slide were $4.6 million. And then we had a net change in our operating transfers of $0.9 million. So all of those items totaled up to $8.9 million, which is the amount that we ended up transferring to the infrastructure reserve. If you add to that net changes in other reserve balances, such as reserves for notes and loans, reserves for prepaids, those miscellaneous reserves, which are detailed earlier on packet page 85. The combination of that $2.2 million and the $8.9 million then comes to the total fiscal year 13 surplus of $11.1 million. So staff recommends that the $8.9 million surplus be transferred to the infrastructure reserve. This would leave a BSR balance of $30.4 million, which represents 19% of our fiscal year 14 budgeted expenditures, which is within our target range. Last year's general fund surplus transfer was $7.6 million. So when we add that to the current year, we've contributed a total of $16.5 million to the infrastructure reserve balance. And these funds are in addition to the $2.2 million keep-up transfer that was recommended by the IBRC.
I want to offer one clarification to the figure of $7.6 million that we mentioned was transferred in fiscal year 2012 to the infrastructure reserve. That is an accurate figure, but it does represent a portion of budget stabilization reserve that was accumulated in fiscal year 2011. So I just wanted to make that clarification. Thank you.
Thanks. So as of June 30th, the infrastructure reserve balance was $17.5 million. That's the amount that's noted in our CAFR. And I would just like to point out that the infrastructure reserve balance is calculated only once a year and is a snapshot of a one day in time. There are several types of timing differences which make that balance a moving target. So for example, closed projects that are approved tonight will increase the IR balance. Funds are being expended today for projects that are going to receive third-party funding in the future. So those are the kinds of items that are going to cause a fluctuation in your IR balance. The last slide, number 7, is enterprise funds. All of the enterprise funds had surplus funds from operations in fiscal year 13, with the exception of the airport fund, which continues to be funded by general fund loans. As of June 30, 13, the total general fund loans were $610,000. All RSR positions are in a positive balance as of 6/30/13, with the exception of the refuse fund. Refuse fund negative RSR was created by this reserve for landfill closure, which we were required to account for in a prior year. However, fiscal year 13 results have improved this position from a negative $4.1 million to a negative $2.8 million. If not for having to account for the landfill reserve, the RSR would be positive in the refuse fund. The airport fund continues to show a negative RSR. They are incurring costs to transition the airport, but will have no revenue until the transition is complete, and that negative position will continue for the next few years. And then we'll open it up for questions.
Colleagues, questions? Okay.
So 2008 was always a great graph to look at. So and it's fallen off because we're 5 years out now. And I'm looking at packet page 89. How are we doing? Do you remember, or how can I get my hands on where are we in relationship to before this big, Great Recession? Are we starting to exceed 2008 revenues, or? And I know that this isn't part of what we're going over tonight, but I just wanted to find out if you guys were able to eyeball some of that.
The last time I recall looking at it, we've improved in just about every category. And we've hit record highs on documentary transfer tax, for example. So we're doing better than 2008 in general.
Okay.
So that's the good news. The problem is we had all those years of...
Right, there's no COL in between there.
Yeah.
So I was just trying to figure out how are we pulling away from 2008 in a way that maybe we can be restored, because the COL and our expenses kicked in a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So much more than it should have. I know it was anemic, but on the other hand, it still was there. So if there's a way to kind of sometimes just include where we were so that we can figure out, because I like to be able to explain to people in the community, our expenses have been recaptured by some of the work that we've done with our labor groups. But on the other hand, we've had COLs, and on the other hand, we're starting to emerge and so the story now is that we're probably exceeding 2008 revenue streams.
Correct.
Okay. But I just don't know how much. I'm going to have to match that up. Okay, that was my only question. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Schmidt?
Let's see, I guess we're both looking at the cover memo and the CFR, is that right? I have a lot of just small questions going through. First, I guess, congratulations on the revenue outlook. We seem to be in the midst of a very nice period. Let me raise a question on packet page 87, which has revenues. And it lists property taxes, sales taxes going up to 25.6 million. Now, we just got, the same day we got that, we got the sales tax revenue from the county presented. And they state that we got 27.8 million, or a net increase of 27.7 over the last year. Why the discrepancy?
You don't mean a net increase of 27.7. Net increase of 47.7.
Percent. Yeah, it says 15.8 there.
Well, this is going to be a subject where I think we can answer tonight, and there will be an adjustment for this year's revenue in the mid-year. When we bring the long-range financial forecast to you, you will see a projection that is in line with the information that you have in front of you, Councilmember Schmidt. I would, the dramatic increase in revenue is due to a particular vendor, and it is almost entirely due to that vendor. We are in the midst of trying to determine whether the windfall that we've experienced so far, the dramatic increase, is going to be accurate on a go-forward basis, and we're trying to seek a lot of information on that. We're not allowed by state code to reveal individual entities' sales taxes, but we are approaching it from a different perspective as to information that's public, and we can calculate what that is. But we will come back with an adjustment at mid-year to reflect this year's revenue and what our best.
For our purposes tonight,
Okay.
Revenues actually might be 2 million higher, although it may be a once and for all thing. Is that how we interpret the number?
I think Councilmember Schmidt's question was directed at a disparity between the accounting number and this.
And what's showing here, what I'm trying to describe is the number in front of Councilmember Schmidt reflects remittances that we've received from a particular vendor, which we only received in the last 2 or 3 quarters. The number that's in the budget was prior to our realization that we were going to be getting that income, that revenue.
Yeah, I guess one of my questions is you are asking us to approve an 8.9 million transfer, but actually it might be outdated.
We believe that the revenue that we've booked so far is the correct revenue. The revenue that we will be booking for 2013 is correct and due to the city, and it correlates with what you're seeing in your in that report from the auditor's office.
Okay, so
Sure, please.
Just add real quick, the number, if we're talking about sales tax reported in the accounting and the financial statements, revenue recognition requires that you recognize revenue up to 60 days of collections. And so, there's going to be the cleanup payment. By the time the State Board of Equalization gets all the returns and completes its audits and finds it remits a kind of a cleanup payment in September. And there might be other returns and other refunds later. So the numbers that you're looking at may not correlate exactly to what's on the accounting records, because the accounting records accounts for it on a GAAP basis, which is maybe a little bit different than the report you're getting from the state, which might be based on the actual quarters and the exact numbers. But based on the timing of when those receipts are received, they may not be reflected on the accounting records.
So we can move ahead with confidence that the numbers in the report we can recommend to the council.
Yes, and the way we want to make sure that the community understands is we see this as one-time excess fundings, and we are recommending that they go to the infrastructure reserve so we can try to address some of our infrastructure needs. So it's not going into an obligation that we see necessarily being sustained going forward.
Yeah, okay. Follow-up question on property tax. You have 28.7 million on that table on page 87. But if you look at the table on page 274, which is governmental activities, it has property taxes at 31.9 million. What's the difference between the general fund and governmental activities?
So if you look at page 37 of the CAFR, you'll see 28, what's the packet? Yeah, 28.7 is general fund, 3.188 is other governmental, and so the total is 31.9 million.
Yeah, I guess I'm confused because the definition of governmental are all the general fund categories. So what's going on outside of the general fund in our normal operating divisions?
Right. Yikes. Special revenue funds? No, it's not debt service, the special revenue funds.
Yeah, if you look at page 143, where there's definitions, says governmental activities are all those of the departments of the city. And I thought all the department funds were in the general fund.
Preliminarily,
No, not in the general fund. You can also have the special revenue funds as well,
I'm sorry, I didn't.
which is going to be considered as part of governmental activities.
What fund did you mention? I didn't hear that.
Special revenue funds. So those will combine all together into the governmental activities statement.
But they are not in the general fund.
That is correct. They're separate and apart from the general fund.
And they are equivalent to $3, $4, $5 million?
According to this report, 3.2 million.
And they're all property tax based.
Yes, so in this case, the 3,188,000 is all property tax for the library project. So you're
That's what
right,
it is.
Joe.
so
It's
this
the,
is,
assessment for the GO bonds.
so this is basically the assessment for the GO bonds. The GO bonds are a property, based on the value, I think the council knows that, based on the valuation of the properties. And this is what we collect to be able to pay on the library bonds. We're collecting it from the property owners according to the assessment.
Okay.
That's not revenue then that goes to the general fund. It's just offset debt service.
Yeah, okay. I guess I didn't understand that distinction. Thank you. You mentioned the airport funds, that we've had a deficit now that is accumulated at $300,000 or something. At what time can we begin anticipating getting revenues? Is there a date set for a turnover?
Maybe staff from Public Works behind me to remind me of the date, but I thought that the current agreements with the airport operators are through 2017, so we can't change the structure of those agreements at this point, of what I understand. So we're looking at maybe 2018 when we have new agreements established, negotiated by city staff with potentially new operators or the same operators with different terms.
So the general fund will be providing an annual subsidy up until that time for 5 years.
Correct, and that was council direction that we move forward with the transition, the early transition of the airport, and we alerted the council that the general fund would have to produce loans. Our understanding from FAA requirements is that we are eligible to get reimbursements, assuming there's revenue, net revenue generated from the operations within a 7-year window. So we're documenting all these expenses, so we have the paperwork in case we decide to get reimbursed, or if there are funds to be reimbursed.
Yeah, so we can expect to see this for 4 more years.
You know, it's probably, it's probably safe to say.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
Lalo, it was my understanding that we really would have had 2 alternatives there. One is to renegotiate and extend the leases and capture additional revenue in the nearer term by doing that. And the other is to wait until the leases are expired and open them up and perhaps capture higher long-term revenue through that measure. But we could, if we wanted to, negotiate a lease extension in exchange for increase in the lease amount in the near term, couldn't we?
Your recollection is what I recall. The reason I stated it the way I did is we may want to see what the market has to offer, and we may want to see if there's different options for us, not just the cost, but the operations and the potential plans to partner in rebuilding facilities, for example. And but you're right, I think we did discuss that option.
So I think it's that, whether it's this meeting or elsewhere when we discuss this, that it's important for the council and the public to understand that if we're making a calculated choice to not renegotiate those leases now and capture some revenue at this time, but instead we think it's a wiser long-term financial decision to wait until they expire, then put it out there as a choice that we're making, as opposed to that we had no options, and if we have some short-term deficit, that we just blindly stumbled into that. This is a deliberate decision that we think is the wiser one. Okay.
Now, I thought there was some issue of capital improvements that the county did not want to invest long-term, and that we were going to speed up the transition so that we could take over and make those investments.
Yes, there were some issues. The county fell out of compliance in being eligible for the federal aviation grants, and there was a concern by the airport users that the runway was not being properly maintained. Yeah. Since then, my understanding is that they are back in compliance. We're working very closely with the FAA in this process, in trying to be the lead, if you will, in this, with our new airport manager on board that is a city employee. And so I think we're going to be in a better position. We need to take over the airport officially, though, so we can go ahead and make our plans and commitments.
Yeah. Okay. There was an interesting table on page 284 of the packet on assessed valuation. And it shows that currently residents are paying 73% of the assessed valuation. Now, in 1979, my understanding, it was a 50-50 deal between commercial and residential, and we've moved up to 73. What is striking is over the last 4 years, from 210 to 213, the number has gone from 69 to 73. Now, this is a period where there has been lots of commercial building and development, little residential, and yet the property tax we're getting is coming increasingly from residential. Does this imply that investing in commercial development is not a good investment for the city?
I think what I get out of this, if you bought a long time ago, you're really fortunate, especially if you hold it in a particular manner that you can sell the property and not reassessed. It is a result of Prop 13, as we all
Right.
know.
But it seems very clear from these numbers that Prop 13 is favoring commercial development over residential development.
Yes, and I think it's a widely discussed issue. One of the things I can tell you we're working on right now is to try to do more in-depth analysis on this data. For example, what percentage of the assessed valuation is below certain thresholds, and where are they? And so we can lay it out and then overlay the permits being pulled. So we're trying to do more collaborate data as a result of having more technology available to us.
Yeah, that would be very interesting to
Yes.
share
And
as we move into the budget.
and then the fire chief said, well, I want to see that data because maybe that tells me where my response calls might go to on the residential side. So we're trying to do all this collaborative effort to
Good.
try to work with the different departments to use the data in new ways that we haven't been
Yeah,
able
that'd
to.
be terrific.
Because we got to be able to make certain assumptions that some of this properties, especially on the residential side, as they're turning over, there's two impacts: the documentary transfer tax, and then reassessment, assuming that it gets reassessed. So that'll help us with our forecasting as well.
Yeah. Great, yeah, that would be very valuable. Good, those are my questions.
I just had a couple on the projected revenue side. Is the transient occupancy tax projection, does that include anticipated new inventory coming online, the new hotels or any of them?
Excuse me. It hasn't opened yet. The expected date was January, and now it's not until April. We did build into the budget revenue for well, I always call it Casa Olga, but we did build in some revenue from that into the budget for this particular year, but we're not going to see, the amount that was calculated, if calculated correctly or projected correctly.
Okay. And then the document transfer tax we had a big jump from FY 2012 to 13, and I'm trying to remember what page you showed the longer-term trend on. Oh, here, page 88 of the packet. So under a more levelized increase, that's, do you think that number for FY 2014, the 5.7 million, is realistic or conservative, or?
It's low.
Okay.
We didn't think that the 6.8 experienced in 2013 and what we were seeing back then when we budgeted was realistic for the following year. And admittedly, we are going to be raising this in the mid-year considerably, and it is going to exceed 6.8, we believe, based on what we're seeing right now.
We are seeing large commercial properties changing hands as well.
And the
Back to the original question of Councilmember Schmidt. So we'll see how these reassessed if they do.
And the number of, to add to what Lalo is saying, and the number of transactions are almost 10% more than what we saw last year at this particular time.
In terms of number of transactions?
In terms of number and in terms of value, they also are
Right.
exceeding what we saw.
Right. Okay. Councilmember Berman, did you have any?
Yeah. Just a quick question. I know this happened before my time, but packet page 82, the little bullet point on the gas fund and how the revenues declined 7.3 million, but the costs only decreased 2.8. And I know it's because we changed the way that we're purchasing our natural gas. Could somebody just give me a 30-second explanation as to what's going on there and whether or not that will end up evening out, and if so, when? Go ahead.
My understanding is that because now we're buying at the market and we're getting out of the long-term fixed contracts, and the prices were going down for a while. We see the reports on a regular basis that we were getting better pricing, and that was the driver.
Was your question when that gets filtered through the system? Yeah. So when will that adjustment end?
Yeah, we'll have to owe you that answer.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
We have very few contracts, fixed contracts in the future. We're almost reaching total market.
Gotcha.
And probably will in the next 3-4 months, if that.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. If we have no more questions or comments, then I'd look for a motion. We have several parts to it.
I'll make the motion to accept the, hang on. Okay, to accept the reports from the, well, we're just closing fiscal year, so make a motion.
Got 4 elements.
Yeah, I know. So I will make a motion to go ahead and close the fiscal year 2013 budget, authorize reappropriation of fiscal year 2013 funds into the fiscal year 2014 budget, close completed capital improvement projects, and transfer remaining funds to or drawing from the appropriate reserves, including the transfer of general fund surplus of $8.9 million from the general fund to the infrastructure reserve for the capital projects fund. And
yeah, there's one other element.
Where?
It's that we're to recommend.
Oh, that where it says in addition?
Yes.
Okay, and in addition, staff recommends the Finance Committee review and forward to the City Council for its approval the city's fiscal year 2013 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, the CAFRA. So.
Okay, so it's us recommending them.
Okay. And I just want to speak to the 8.9 million and last year's 7.6, and we were trying to craft out 40 million. Is that right? 40 million of catch-up? Is this where this is sort of thinking it's going, or?
Well, this gives us an opportunity to bring you some recommendations to we'll keep the IBRIC recommendations in mind.
Right.
With this new funding, and working along with the council on any priorities that come out of the infrastructure review. So at this point, we're not really identifying it to anything until that process evolves. But that's definitely an option that you could take.
But this is part of the nut that we're trying to crack it.
We, I believe, we did include indications of this surplus in the analysis that was done for the infrastructure committee.
Right. Yeah.
If that's what you were asking, Councilmember Shepherd.
Yes and no. I mean, we know that we have hundreds of millions of dollars that we're trying to craft a revenue stream for, but there were those 3 components, the keep up and the catch up, that I sort of take a look at this for. So I just, anyway, I think that this is an excellent way to start to fuel that. And so I appreciate staff for keeping that. I know we directed you to do it, but we are having a good experience with this. And so thank you.
I'll just add as a follow-on on this issue of the surplus that we've had really now for 3 years, because last year's was a combination of 2 years, and how that's a major achievement, and it's a small fraction of the infrastructure backlog that we have. And so I would hope that we begin to see a process where we discuss whether we, in addition to looking at specific projects and allocations, whether we build into the budget an increase in the infrastructure funding annually. And so we maybe have 2 different layers to this. One is the sustained level, and the other is a specific targeted purposes of additional funds beyond that sustained level.
And we'll be having that discussion with you when we do the long-range financial forecast, and you'll be able to give us direction.
Great, thank you. All right, all in favor? Aye. Aye, that passes unanimously. And we move on to the final item, which is fiscal year 2013 year-end capital improvement program projects status report.
This is an informational report that we typically bring at this time of year, which shows the final wrap-up for the status on the whole series of capital projects, the whole population, I should say, of capital projects that we have in the city. This is kind of a unique report. It's one of those views you get where it's the whole pie. Not just things we're changing in the adopted budget process, but everything that is still an active project with funding in it. So we show you in the large number of attachments, we show you the project number, as well as the original budgeted amount, the total budget amount, and the encumbrance, and what's been spent and progress. So it's a pretty comprehensive report. We provide it to you purely as an informational item, and we typically turn it over immediately for any questions you guys may have. And we do have the project managers who are responsible for these projects here to hopefully answer your questions here tonight. So thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, questions? Councilmember Schmidt, did you have some?
Let's see, in council discussions over the last 12 months, time and again, we come across the issues of parking and traffic. And 2 of the elements that we keep talking about are a fundamental revision of the traffic model and comprehensive parking. Is there anything in the CIP which would help us get to that point?
Good evening. Jaime Rodriguez, the Chief Transportation Official. We have one specific CIP, PL 12,000, which is our parking and transportation CIP. That's actually the fund source that we use to fund the current efforts that we've made in developing a brand new traffic model and are in the process of getting that implemented, as well as presented to the Planning and Transportation Commission and City Council.
What was the number?
PL 12,000, parking and transportation improvements. So we funded that as part of the comprehensive plan update, and we funded it out of that fund source.
Yeah.
Packet page 348
348?
at the bottom.
Okay, so this is a program that involves many things, but you would draw on it for something like the parking traffic studies.
That's correct.
And your intention is to draw about $300,000 per year on that.
That's correct.
Now, you do mention explicitly the downtown parking study, but there's no mention of the update of the traffic model. Is that included as well?
That's correct. It is included within that program. When we developed the original language for the 2013 year, it was a project we originally had intended to start. It's something that kind of came out of the comprehensive plan work that we were doing at the time. So we use that CIP to fund projects as they come online or as needed, and that's the only reason it's not described in the original CIP.
Yeah, well, I guess just as one council member, I'd be very interested if you came asking for more funding for that. And I think working with the IT department maybe in generating ways of gathering data and numbers on both traffic and parking would be a great innovation.
Thank you.
So if I first just follow up on that, in this process tonight where we're reviewing and accepting, if there are items that we would like to have for greater consideration, we can request that. So, Lalo, did you want to speak to that? So, the process. What's the timing of our next review of the CIP iteration for FY 2015 now?
You're talking about new projects that we would...
Yeah, so
okay.
for instance, Councilmember Schmidt was talking about an interest in discussing additional investment in the traffic planning issues.
I think giving us comments like that tonight will help us shape our 15 budget. The people behind me are going to be asking from that pot of money, and so this is a good opportunity for us to do that so we can consider.
Okay, so that brings up whether if we have one colleague who's bringing up a suggestion like that, then you'd benefit from hearing whether the committee as a whole is interested in moving in such a direction.
I think the more direct you are, the better it is for us as we're shaping our program.
Okay, so I'll just encourage colleagues to take that note that any guidance that we wish to provide tonight on greater emphasis in a given area or de-emphasis in one for fiscal year 2015, this is an opportunity to do that. Councilmember Berman. And I should add that, and so if one of us speaks to it, it actually, in this setting, is appropriate for the balance of us to give the input so they get a sense of whether that's a consensus opinion or not.
So in regards to that, I might have to give it a little more thought and see if anything comes to mind tonight, or if not, I'll save it for a later opportunity. The question that I had is on packet page 339 in regards to street improvements in the Street Improvement Fund. And I noticed that there's kind of a balloon expenditure for 2013 of $7.1 million and a less than anticipated expenditure from fiscal year 2012 of 3.1. Is that $2 million in projects that wasn't completed in fiscal year 2012 that's rolling over, or?
Good evening, Brad Eggleston, Assistant Director of Public Works. Could you perhaps point me to the page numbers on the bottom where it says
sure. Page 19 of 21, and it's PE 86070.
Page 19 of
21 for Exhibit 1. I don't.
Okay, I'm looking at the wrong thing.
3B. I keep on throwing out numbers at you.
Yes, thanks for the question. I don't have the details on the projects in front of me, but typically what happens with these is we have a continuous level of funding, and then it really just depends on when we actually go to bid with the projects and award the construction contracts. So for instance, even though we've now raised our street maintenance program budget up to $5.1 million per year, depending on the timing of when we take projects to bid and construct them, we could very well have a year where we've got $3 million of expenditures and then $8 million the next year.
Okay, and I'm sure that you guys are keeping in mind that $8 million in street work, well, we definitely, street work's fantastic and we want to raise our PCI or CPI or whatever the order of that acronym is. $8 million in street work is a lot of a lot of work on the streets that at one time might be a little overwhelming to our residents. So I'm sure we're keeping in mind that we have to do this in a systematic fashion.
So there's two cycles, and let me see if I can try to explain it so it's clearly understood. There's the cycle of the work. Well, let me back up. The cycle when you award the contract. The amount of money you encumber is the technical term for that contract. So let's say you award $3 million, you encumber $3 million, then you start paying out. So what this report is reflecting is the payout is not necessarily the cycle of the work itself.
Okay.
So there's timing issues, but I think your point is a good one because there are concerns, one of capacity, and second of the lifestyle that we and the impacts of the work. So I think this is part of the equation that we have.
Perfect, and it's tough. I mean, I know it's I joke about talking with friends, and I can be in a conversation with two friends at the same time, and one will say, "Our streets are in such terrible shape," and the other one will say, "We're tearing up we're fixing too many streets at the same time." And it's like, well, you can't win there, but but it's a reality of the situation and just something that I'm sure you guys are keeping in mind.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Shepherd.
Thank you. On page 319, you kind of go back and review some of the interests that were surfaced during the IBRIC report. And I think it's time, I need to understand again, if you could remind me, page 319 of the packet. How are we doing with the inventory? I know I just got an email from one of our commissioners from that group and really feeling like we're taking too long to kind of get that categorized. Are we taking actions on that? I'm sorry, I can't remember.
You're talking about the infrastructure management system
Yes.
application? Okay. Let me ask Brad to come back up because he just did a status update to the IBRIC committee's members.
And I was on that committee, so I'll listen this time. But yeah, because I know you did, but I just can't remember it.
Hello again. Yeah, so we did just do a status update describing how that was a recommendation in the IBRIC final report. That was December 2011. We first funded it in the CIP the following fiscal year. So that was July 2012. We were doing some preliminary evaluations of kind of off-the-shelf software systems. Didn't find anything that was working out. We had assigned a project manager who began working on the project that fall. That person became very ill and missed work for some time. So we got a little stalled. It was earlier this year, kind of I think February timeframe, where the project became part of our new IT governance policy, and the project manager from IT department was assigned. So since that time, we developed a project charter. There was internal interviews with city staff done by the IT project manager. There was a decision made to split the project into two phases, one where we would have consultants services to help us look at the city's existing systems for tracking infrastructure assets, compare what we're doing to best practices in the industry, and then make recommendations for procuring an actual system. So that's what happened, is that the project was split into two phases, essentially. So and actually we put out an RFP for those consultant services during the summer. We received only one proposal. This was about 6 weeks ago or so. The proposal came in higher than we were expecting. We made a change to our scope of work, which required us going back out to bid for another RFP. And that's currently posted on the purchasing website. We're expecting proposals in, I think it's 2 weeks from now. And the expectation is that process of the consultant assistance will take 3 to 4 months once the contract is in place, and then we'll move directly from there into a system procurement phase based on those recommendations.
let me just add that what staff found is that there was not an off-the-shelf system that encompassed all the needs that and desires that staff had to centralize the information so we could get away from having 5 different separate systems. And so that's been the challenge that I know that we know of at least 7 different systems, including the system that Stanford University is using that we looked at. So it's not from a lack of interest, it's just a lack of knowledge of where there may be some systems. So that's why we're trying to seek a professional, because maybe we're going to have to slice this in a different manner and accept a different result or a different product and augment to that. Because our goal was to try not to have separate systems so we wouldn't have misinformation or different sets of data.
So I think the surprise, it sounds like to everyone, the IBRIC, the council, and the staff, is that there really weren't off-the-shelf systems. Were we all under the assumption that because inventory management, capital inventory management is done routinely, that there would be some fairly off-the-shelf systems available? Is that correct?
Right, and don't get me wrong, there's some systems out there, but we just thought we could connect more pieces to it because it's a lot easier to have, that there's for example, Palo Works has, help me on the name of
Maintenance connection.
Yeah, and then I was thinking of the energy dude, or I forget what it's called, that helps us with the energy efficiency. So we're trying to see, can we have a system that helps us calculate all this?
If we accept that there really wasn't something close to an off-the-shelf item, what are all these other entities doing?
Can I ask a question before we go there? I'm sorry, but I did see an information on the IBM Smart City, which is supposed to do all of this at the League of Cities this last week. Has that been prospected at all?
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, I just ran into one of the managers of that up at the research park today. So it is Smart Cities asset master plan. It also keeps track of everything and then also allows you to help schedule so that you're digging up the street one time for 3 things. I don't know, it's a pitch, but that's what they call it, the Smart City. So I'll try to get that contact to you, but go ahead.
Okay. Can I add one more thing? I mean, I think we are still hoping that we'll find something that's fairly off the shelf and that we can implement without too much trouble that meets our needs. So far, when we've done demos of these systems and we've had people approach us and say, we've got a great system that's going to meet all your needs. And what we have typically found so far is it's really asset inventory and work order processing type of system. Whereas the IBRIC's recommendations were much more focused on long-term planning and having something that was going to help us, create reports that looked out 30 years and helped us do the capital planning. And several people that we've had demos with and discussed, when we actually asked, well, what sort of capabilities in that realm does your system have? They say, that's under development, or they show us something that's very limited and doesn't really meet the intent of what we wanted.
Well, that sounds like an important distinction that's at the crux of why we haven't been able to move forward sooner on that. So I'd really encourage you to emphasize that, because that finally answers the question for me. Okay. And then had a couple other questions, and Brad, you may want to stick around. Well, I'll hit yours first. So we've, the scenario that Councilmember Berman had talked about of we now, because a few years ago, I can tell you, Brad, Mark, that we only had 1 set of complaints, which was why are our streets so bad? And now we have the 2 sets, which are why are our streets so bad, although fewer of those, and why is there so much work being done on our streets? And I had that from a colleague actually during a campaign who asked both those. But What I still don't have a good clarity on is the methodology that we use for prioritizing streets. And I'm not asking for it tonight, but I would like for us to be able to get that more transparently. Because I still am mystified why there are some streets that, gee, if you ask my list of the ones I'm familiar with, they'd be up for the last 5 years as among the top-ranked worst streets in the city, and they're not on the list yet for repair. And on the other hand, I know some of the real bad streets have already gotten taken care of, and we've made some real progress. I recall that when IBRIC was done, they had, I think it was Lee Levy standing in front of Greer, or in the middle of Greer, with a bunch of potholes around him. And I happened to drive through that spot recently, and not only is Greer paved, but the street coming in from one side is paved, the street coming in from the other side is paved. They're all paved around there now, and I don't think it was just because Lee was standing there. So it really exhibited to me, this has been a huge progress that we've made in recent years. We're not done with it. We still have several years to get to where we really want to go. So I want to say that positive thing, but I still would like to have a more transparent sharing of the methodology. Because sometimes it's working well in a lot of places, and sometimes it still appears as if something isn't quite right to it.
And I could speak to that at least briefly. I mean, the basic methodology is that, so I'll just reiterate the goal we're trying to achieve, which is a citywide PCI average of 85 by 2019, with no street having a PCI below 60. And we get those scores by doing a citywide survey of every city street every 2 years. In fact, we just completed the latest survey like that this summer. And really the way we're trying to meet that goal is we're looking at that list, we're ranking those streets from highest PCI to lowest PCI, and then we're looking and saying, okay, here's the lowest PCI street, can we go work on that street? And it's the utilities coordination that is probably really the thing that's causing the discrepancy you see where there's a street that's not getting fixed. So we're using a 5-year out utilities coordination tool in GIS, and we have to look in, often there's a street in really bad condition, but 3 years from now, there's going to be a sewer or a gas or a water main project.
So assuming that that's the case, I don't think the council has a good clarity on it, and I definitely don't think the community does. And I've seen that we now have some good maps that I had been asking for actually a couple years, and then we've got them showing not just what's going to be paved this coming year and the following year, but what's been paved the last couple years, and even some of, I think, generally showing what would have been paved if we hadn't done this big increase in the investment. But if I'm on one of those streets that's full of potholes, and I can't understand why my street's being neglected, and I'm not on that street, but yeah, it would be really helpful to be able to say, oh, there's a very rational reason. Remember that the third complaint, in addition to the other two that Councilmember Berman cited, is why are you paving the street and then digging it up for utilities work a year or two later? So you've got an answer to that, but unless the community actually can see that, first that we need to communicate that we are planning deliberately in that regard and how we're doing that, because there still are times where there's a perception in the community that we're digging up streets shortly after we pave them, and there may be private parties are doing it that we can't control and those kinds of things. But our Chief Communication Officer, I would very much encourage that you engage with her on how we can get that message out, because up until recently, when traffic and parking have been at the top of citizens' concerns, up until then it was this issue, the pothole issue, was the primary complaint where people just saw it in their day-to-day lives and really had concerns over it. We're making big progress, but I think we still have one or two gaps in the communication side. You're doing some really, I think it sounds like some good methodical approaches to it. We need to share that information and not be afraid to share it.
Okay, yeah, we appreciate that feedback. And in fact, one of the things we have upcoming probably in the next month is we're going to post all of that street survey PCI information I was mentioning from this last summer on the city's open data webpage.
Good. And
so we'll think about opportunities. There might be ways where we can roll into that, where we've got streets with a very low PCI that are not in our plan, saying something about why they're not.
Great, great. My final question is on traffic systems, back to Councilmember Schmidt's earlier question, and that is that are we looking at some next generation smart systems that are starting to emerge on the market for traffic control, and I assume that those would be in capital investments, even if they're hybrid sensor hardware, software systems.
Thank you, Councilmember. Yes, yeah, in fact we are. We actually started our first phase of that deployment over the last 2 years. And we have an active CIP. I don't remember the exact number that's in the book here. We just haven't been able to launch it because it's tied to a grant source from the state that hasn't been released to us yet. But we do plan on upgrading our central traffic signal system, and then once that's done, we'll replace controllers at the individual traffic systems, which we've already started, and then that'll allow us to retime things more quickly. It'll allow us to collect data on a daily basis to be able to give the community more information, as well as push that information online. And so it's a pretty robust system that we've already started to deploy. We're just kind of hung up on this grant, and to be honest, we're almost at the point, just tired of waiting. We've got the money. We probably should just move it forward this year.
So you mentioned being able to retime signals more frequently. Would that, if I just became aware of one particular technology that's coming onto the market that is a fully dynamic process where it is continuously adjusting in response to traffic demands. So if we have those smart signals, and if there was a system that gave real-time information, would they be able to respond to that kind of system, or would it need to be controlled differently?
No, it would respond on the fly, and that's actually the system that we've already procured, at least the base system, the module for what's called an adaptive traffic signal system that you're referring to. There's different models on the market. The one that we would likely purchase is a system called Synchro Green, and it would be very effective along a corridor like, say, Sand Hill Road, potentially Embarcadero Road. The county has the same system. It has it in play along Oregon Expressway and Page Mill Road.
Now, those are on certain corridors. Are you looking at any systems that are fully comprehensive?
Well, the Synchro Green system specifically is that. It's everything tied together.
Everything in the city, not just in a corridor?
The whole city tied together.
Okay.
That's correct, yeah. And in fact, we've actually looked at it and talked to the vendor about developing a parking module that allows us to push information online as well.
Okay, great, thanks. All right. No other questions or comments?
This is informational only, is it?
Correct.
So no action.
Right.
Right.
Yes, so we need a motion to actually accept. Sorry, did someone?
I move that we accept the information on the city's capital improvement program contained in this report.
Second.
All right, any discussion?
Nope.
All in favor? Aye. That passes unanimously.
Chair Burt, if I
Yes.
could just take a second to thank David Ramberg, Laura Couric, Joe Sasha, and Laura's team in accounting. They put in a lot of hours to get this out earlier. She's moving the bar higher and higher, getting it to you earlier and earlier.
Thank you.
So we can make informed decisions and move our funding. So, and I also wanted to acknowledge all the CIP project managers behind me that were here tonight to help answer questions.
Yeah, we appreciate everybody being available, and sorry if we didn't call on you.
Yeah, no, and the reports were really, really helpful, really great. Thank you.
So our next meeting, Lalo?
Our next meeting is Tuesday, December the 3rd. We will be bringing to you, as David mentioned, the first quarter fiscal year results. We won't be adjusting the budget at that point, but we're going to be giving you indications of where we think we will be adjusting the budget in the mid-year. We're also bringing to you the results of the conceptual plan for the street sweeping. Remember, we went on a trial program, and so Mike and his team have a recommendation for you. I think it's been a positive experience, and I'll leave it at that for now. We're having to amend some of our fees as a result of the cost of service study where we were over. So some members of the committee will be happy about that. And then on the 17th is our last meeting unless we have a special meeting. And at that time, we plan to bring you a view of the emergency medical transport fees. There's some options for you to consider on the cost recovery level. Also, a recommendation on the CLEAN program coming through the UAC, inventory management audit, and then a large gas customer rate option as well.
Is there a date set for the long-term financial forecast?
Yes. We had planned to come that night, but unfortunately, we've come upon new information that we believe is critical to the forecast model that we need to vet out. And it would be better for us to see if we can come back to you in January, assuming that the new mayor has a committee appointed in time for us to meet in January. If not, then we'll have to do the first meeting in February. But it is a critical component that concerns us, so we want to make sure that we have time to review it.
Okay, thank you. And on that note, we're adjourned.